We live in a world where everything seems designed for immediacy. We order food from an app and it's at our door in minutes. We want information and with a click, we have it instantly. If our internet connection takes even a few seconds longer than usual, we get frustrated. Modern society has trained us to want everything now, without delay, without waiting. But what about the deepest and most precious things in life? True love doesn't come with a click. A solid career isn't built overnight. A tree doesn't bear fruit the same day it's planted. And spiritual maturity isn't achieved by running, but by walking step by step in processes that often involve patience, silence, and trust. This is where the big challenge comes in. Wait. Waiting isn't a comfortable concept for us. In fact, at times, it can feel like an endless ordeal. Waiting for a job when the bills keep coming. Waiting for a medical answer when our hearts are filled with anxiety. Waiting for that prayer we've prayed again and again, yet to hear a yes from heaven. Have you ever felt like that? Like you're trapped in an invisible waiting room, not knowing how long you'll have to stay there. Maybe you're even there right now. The Bible is no stranger to this sentiment. Isaiah 40:31 reminds us, "But those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not faint." This verse reveals a powerful principle. Waiting is not a waste of time, but a space where God renews strength, builds character, and prepares the heart for what is to come. Waiting in God's hands becomes a process of growth. Imagine life as a garden. When you plant a seed, you don't sit in front of the soil demanding it bloom immediately. You know it needs time, water, light, and care. Likewise, our prayers, our dreams, and our promises require patience. Not because God delays, but because in the silence of waiting, He works in the depths of our being. Personally, I've had to learn this firsthand. There were times when I thought God had forgotten me, especially when I was looking for quick answers and doors seemed to close one after another. But looking back, I understand that every delay was actually preparation. What I saw as a delay, God saw as the perfect moment to align the pieces and take me to a better place than I could have imagined. And here is the central point of this introduction. Patience is a countercultural virtue, but absolutely essential for those who want to walk with God. It's not about sitting back and resigning yourself, but rather about active waiting, filled with trust and hope. A waiting that doesn't exhaust you, but rather strengthens you. Throughout this message, I want to take you on a 10-step journey where we'll explore patience, the purpose of waiting, how to keep faith and hope alive, how to recognize God's blessings, and ultimately, how to live a life of continual trust in Him. But before we dive into all of that, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. What if the wait that bothers you so much today is actually the fertile ground where God is planting something that will transform your life tomorrow? Patience is one of those virtues we all recognize as valuable, but very few manage to practice consistently. It's not simply putting up with it or resigning ourselves to things taking time, but rather a spiritual posture that invites us to trust that God is in control, even when we don't understand the process. We can define patience as the ability to wait with active hope, without losing calm or faith in the midst of delays. It is, in essence, a fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:22, which means it's not just a human quality we must force, but a divine grace that develops within us as we remain connected to God. In practice, patience doesn't always feel like a virtue. Sometimes it seems more like a burden. It makes us uncomfortable, makes us question ourselves, and confronts us with our own anxieties. However, it is precisely in those moments of discomfort that the true wisdom of patience lies. One of the clearest images for understanding patience is that of a garden. No one sows seeds in the ground expecting a leafy tree full of fruit to appear the next day. The process requires time, care, and trust in what cannot be seen. First comes the planting, then the silent waiting, then the small, seemingly insignificant sprouts, and finally, the fruit. Between each stage, there's a period when nothing seems to be happening. But in reality, beneath the surface, the roots are growing and strengthening. This is also the way our lives are. There are times when we feel like nothing is changing, that our prayers are unanswered, or that our dreams are indefinitely delayed. However, what seems like silence is actually a time when God is working deep within, preparing the soil of our hearts and strengthening our roots to sustain the fruit to come. Patience, then, is the ability to tend that garden with faith, watering with prayer, fertilizing with gratitude, and trusting that growth will come in God's perfect timing. One of the most powerful biblical stories about patience is that of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a son, but the years passed, and that promise seemed increasingly impossible. Abraham grew older, Sarah remained barren, and the biological clock seemed to have stopped against them. Imagine that wait. Nights of unanswered prayer, days of doubt and tired looks. However, God's promise remained. Abraham had to learn that patience didn't mean sitting idly by, but rather trusting that even if logic tells him otherwise, God's word always comes true. Finally, when everything seemed humanly impossible, Isaac was born. The promise materialized in God's perfect timing, not Abraham's or Sarah's. This story reminds us that patience doesn't mean God has forgotten us, but rather that He is setting the stage to show us His faithfulness in a way that leaves us without any doubt that He is the author of our blessing. We often confuse patience with inaction. We think that being patient is simply waiting without doing anything. But biblical patience is different. It is an active waiting. It is praying while we trust. It is working while we continue to believe. It is keeping your heart grateful even when we don't see results. Patience is like that farmer who, even though he knows the harvest won't come immediately, still gets up every morning to water, clean, and care for the land. He knows his efforts are not in vain because growth has a divine timing that cannot be rushed. In our lives, patience is manifested when we continue to sow love in the midst of a difficult relationship, when we continue to pray for someone who seems unchanging, or when we continue to work with excellence in a job that still doesn't give us everything we expect. It's not about sitting back, but about living in faith while God does His work. The wisdom of patience teaches us that life's greatest gifts don't come quickly. Haste robs us of depth, but patience leads us to maturity and enjoy the fruits in due time. If you feel like you're in a waiting period today, remember this. God isn't late, nor has He forgotten you. Patience is how He shapes your character, strengthens your faith, and prepares you to sustain the blessing you haven't yet seen. Just as Abraham and Sarah learned that the promise is fulfilled in God's time, we too must learn that patience is not a loss, but an investment in our spiritual growth. Every minute of waiting on God is a seed that will bear fruit in His perfect timing. Talking about patience may sound nice in theory, but it's truly put to the test in everyday life, in those simple and sometimes desperate moments we all face. Patience isn't built in speeches, but in the small battles of every day. When traffic stalls, when the internet goes down in the middle of an important task, when we're waiting for a medical result, or when our plans seem to be delayed without explanation. It is there, in our daily lives, that we discover whether our patience is genuine or simply a word we repeat without living it. Daily patience is like a muscle. It is strengthened through constant exercise in the small tests that seem insignificant, but which prepare us for the great challenges. One of the most common areas where patience is tested is in the search for employment or opportunities. I remember a time in my life when I desperately needed a job. I had sent out dozens of resumes, attended interviews, and repeatedly received the same response: "We'll call him." That phrase became a kind of empty echo that seemed to never materialize. Every day I checked my email hoping for a job offer, but all I found was silence. It was frustrating. However, in the midst of that wait, I learned something valuable. God wasn't just preparing a job for me, He was also preparing me for that job. During that time of uncertainty, I developed skills I never would have considered important, strengthened my faith in divine provision, and learned to appreciate the small details of life more. In the end, when the opportunity came, it wasn't just any job. It was one far better than I had hoped for. And I realized that if I had rushed into the first door that opened, I likely would have missed out on something greater God had in store for me. Patience, in that case, was the bridge that took me from frustration to fulfillment. Patience isn't always manifested in waiting for grand promises like Abraham or Joseph. It's often revealed in the simple scenarios of our daily routine. At home, raising children is one of the greatest schools of patience. Teaching, correcting, and guiding them requires the ability to wait for growth processes to mature at their own pace. A mother who teaches her child to walk knows that she cannot force them. She must wait for their timing, support them, encourage them, and celebrate every small step forward. In personal relationships, we've all experienced conflicts with friends, family, or co-workers. Patience teaches us to listen more than we speak, to avoid immediate anger, and to give the other person time to reflect. Proverbs 15:18 says, "A hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger pacifies conflict. Patience in an argument can prevent deep wounds. At work, we don't always receive immediate recognition. Often, patience consists of continuing to do the right thing even when no one applauds. Over time, excellence and perseverance speak louder than anything else. In health, waiting for medical results, recovery processes, or lifestyle changes is fertile ground for impatience. However, each day of discipline and hope is a seed that bears long-term fruit. Being patient doesn't simply mean toughing it out until the bad times pass. From a spiritual perspective, patience is a form of discipline. Every time we choose to wait calmly, we are strengthening our trust in God. Every time we decide not to despair, we are saying, "Lord, I trust that you are in control even though I don't see what's happening yet." A biblical example that reflects this practice is that of the people of Israel in the desert. They spent 40 years in a waiting process before entering the promised land. For many, that time seemed like a waste. But in reality, it was a necessary process for them to be transformed from slaves into a free people prepared to receive their inheritance. Patience, in this case, was the tool God used to shape an entire nation. Think of a red light. When we're in a hurry, that minute of waiting can seem like an eternity. However, the traffic light serves a purpose to prevent accidents and regulate traffic. If we all ignored the red light out of impatience, the result would be chaos. The same thing happens in life. Often, God stops us at a red light that seems unfair or unnecessary. But in reality, He's protecting us, aligning circumstances, or preventing us from hurtling toward disaster. Patience in this case is trusting that if the light is red, it's for our own good. 1. Constant prayer. Start the day by asking for calm and wisdom. A simple prayer can change the way we face the day's challenges. 2. Breathe and pause. Before responding in anger or frustration, take a few seconds to breathe. Many impulsive reactions can be avoided with a moment of silence. 3. Practice gratitude. Impatience arises when we focus on what we don't have. Gratitude brings us back into perspective and toward what we do have. 4. Remember promises. Writing verses or reminders of God's faithfulness can help us maintain faith in the midst of waiting. 5. Appreciate small advances. Instead of despairing because we haven't reached our final goal, let's celebrate each small step. I remember one time I was standing in an endless line for an important transaction. I'd been standing for over 2 hours, surrounded by people just as frustrated as I was. My first reaction was impatience and anger. What a waste of time. Think. But in the midst of that wait, I decided to take out a book I had in my backpack and started reading. What seemed like a wasted time transformed into a moment of learning and peace. In the end, that wait became a space where I discovered something valuable that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise. That day I realized that patience doesn't change circumstances, but it does change our attitude toward them. When we cultivate patience in small things, we are also training ourselves to face big things. If we learn to wait calmly in line, we will also be able to wait with faith for a healing process, a job opportunity, or a promise from God that we have yet to see fulfilled. Daily patience builds character, helps us appreciate the process, and reminds us that every day, even those that seem monotonous or difficult, has a purpose in God's plan. Patience in everyday life is not a burden, but a spiritual training. Every small act of waiting with faith is a seed that strengthens our character and brings us closer to God's purpose for us. When we think about waiting, we almost always associate it with frustration, with the feeling of being stuck in life, while everything around us seems to be moving forward. However, what is rarely mentioned is that in that same space of apparent inactivity lie some of the greatest gifts God gives us. It's like a secret room where, at first glance, there is only silence and solitude, but when we turn on the light, we discover it's full of treasures. The problem is that we almost never stop long enough to explore what's there. Waiting, when lived with faith and purpose, becomes a workshop where our character is forged. It is there that we learn to know ourselves, to detect our strengths as well as our weaknesses. Often, what we ask of God does not come immediately, not because He does not want to give it to us, but because He knows that if we receive it prematurely, we will not be ready to sustain it. What good would it do to receive a blessing if we do not know how to manage it? Therefore, each day of waiting becomes a silent training that prepares us to firmly sustain what is to come. Consider, for example, Joseph, the son of Jacob. His brothers sold him. He was a slave in Egypt. and he spent years unjustly imprisoned. At first glance, it all seemed like a cruel and unjustified delay, but in reality, that time of darkness was forging in Joseph a firm character, a profound wisdom, and a leadership capacity that would later make him governor of Egypt. If Joseph had arrived at the palace earlier, without having gone through the pit and prison, he probably would not have had the maturity necessary to handle power without it destroying him. His waiting, although painful, was the fertile soil from which his blessings sprang. The blessings of waiting aren't always immediately visible, but they manifest in the way we learn to value what we receive. When everything comes easily and quickly, we tend to take it for granted. But when what we long for takes a long time to arrive, our hearts learn to appreciate it differently. Waiting teaches us gratitude. It teaches us to recognize that every detail is a gift and that nothing has been given to us by our own merit, but by grace. That gratitude is, in itself, a blessing because it changes our perspective on life. Another of the hidden blessings of waiting is spiritual sensitivity. In the silence and apparent delay, we learn to hear God's voice in ways we would never hear in haste. It's like when someone turns off all the noise in a room. At first it seems uncomfortable, even desperate, but after a while our ears begin to pick up sounds that were always there, but were drowned out by the noise. Waiting is that silence necessary to perceive the eternal. There is also the blessing of fortitude. Waiting is not a passive act. It is endurance. It is training of the soul. Every day you decide to trust, even if you don't see anything, you're strengthening your spirit. It's like the athlete who repeats the same exercise over and over again without seeing immediate results, but who, unknowingly, is building the strength that will one day be needed at the most crucial moment. Waiting forges an inner resilience that no external circumstance can break. And finally, there is the blessing of transformation, because no one who goes through a true season of waiting comes out the same person. Something changes deep within. Vision broadens, desires are purified, faith is strengthened, and the relationship with God deepens. Waiting not only prepares the way for blessing, but it prepares us to receive it. And when that happens, we realize that what we asked for at the beginning is no longer what we long for at the end. Sometimes we even discover that God gives us something better than we ever imagined. Therefore, waiting is never a loss. It's an investment. It's a gift in disguise, a process that, even if we don't understand it at the time, reveals itself later as one of God's greatest acts of love toward us. Perhaps right now you see nothing but delay and silence, but believe me, blessings are brewing in the invisible world that will mark your life forever. Trusting God when everything is going well is relatively simple. It's easy to raise our hands in gratitude when projects prosper, when our bodies are healthy, when our homes are at peace and doors open easily. But the true measure of faith is not revealed on sunny days, but on dark nights. Our continued trust in God is tested when answers don't come, when the sky seems silent, when resources are exhausted, and when our strength falters. It is in this realm that we discover whether our faith is circumstantial or grounded in eternity. Continually trusting God means remaining anchored in His character, not in our emotions or changing circumstances. Emotions fluctuate like the waves of the ocean. Today we feel faith, tomorrow we feel doubt. Today we wake up with hope, tomorrow despair knocks at the door. But God's character doesn't change. He is faithful, just, and loving at all times. When we hold on to that truth and not to what we see or feel, trust becomes a habit, a way of life. The Bible is full of examples of men and women who walked with that continual trust. One of the most powerful is that of King David. Before becoming king, he was a shepherd, a warrior, and a fugitive. He was often cornered, betrayed, and unjustly persecuted. Yet amidst his psalms, the same song is repeated, "I trust in you, Lord." David did not hide his anguish. He wept, lamented, and cried out. But at the end of each prayer, his heart returned to the certainty that God was in control. That is the trust that is renewed every day, even when circumstances may say otherwise. Continual trust is also illustrated in the life of Daniel. This man was taken captive to Babylon, stripped of his land, his culture, and his freedom. He could have given up, he could have complained, he could have abandoned his faith. Yet he maintained his trust in God even in the land of exile. When they decreed that no one could pray to any god other than the king, Daniel did not compromise his faith. He continued to pray 3 times a day as he always did. That unwavering trust took him to the lion's den, but it also led him to see God close the lion's jaws. Continual trust in God does not always prevent trials, but it does guarantee His companionship and intervention in the midst of them. Now, what does it mean to live this continual trust in our daily lives? It means deciding each morning to surrender control to God, even when our human instinct wants to cling to certainty. It means recognizing that we won't always understand the why of what happens, but that we can still rest in the who, in who is on our side. It means taking steps of faith even when we don't have a complete map, trusting that God will light the way as we move forward. We can imagine trust as a suspension bridge over an abyss. From where we stand, the bridge looks fragile, unstable, and the other side seems distant. Our fear tells us it's impossible to cross. But when we take the first step, we feel that the ropes, although moving, hold us. And when we keep moving forward, we discover that the bridge is firmer than it seemed. This is what trusting in God is like. We take a step without seeing the whole picture, and in that movement we discover that His hand holds us. Continued trust also requires spiritual memory. We often forget past victories and focus only on the present problem. But faith is strengthened when we remember what God has already done. The people of Israel had the custom of erecting stone altars at the places where God had manifested Himself as a sign for future generations. Every time someone passed by, those stones were a reminder of God's faithfulness. We too need to erect altars in our memory, to remember the time God opened an unexpected door, the occasion He provided what seemed impossible, the day He gave us peace in the midst of chaos. That memory compels us to continue trusting, because if God did it before, He can do it again. Trusting continually also means relinquishing control. This is perhaps one of the most difficult parts, because human beings are accustomed to planning, organizing, and anticipating. We want to have everything under control, but life teaches us time and again that not everything depends on us. Illness strikes without warning, the economy changes, people fail, plans are altered. In those moments, anxiety consumes us if we believe everything rests on our shoulders. But when we trust in God, we understand that letting go of control isn't weakness, but wisdom. It's like handing over the helm of a boat to the most experienced captain in the midst of a storm. This surrender allows us to rest. Jesus Himself taught this when He said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Continued trust doesn't eliminate problems, but it does remove the unbearable burden of trying to solve them alone. When we let God take control, our soul finds rest, even amidst the waves. Continuous trust in God is not just a private act. It is also reflected in our decisions and our way of life. When others see us act serenely in the midst of uncertainty, when they see us speak with hope in the midst of crisis, they are witnessing the evidence of our faith. That trust becomes a testimony. Sometimes, more than our words, it is our trusting attitude that speaks of the God in whom we believe. But what do we do on days when faith wavers, when trust seems to be running out? That's where the community of faith comes in. God never called us to live alone. He gave us siblings, friends, and spiritual family to remind us of His promises when we forget, to lift us up when we fall, to pray for us when we have no strength. Continued trust doesn't mean that we will never doubt, but rather that, even in the midst of doubt, we allow ourselves to be surrounded by those who remind us that God remains faithful. We could summarize all this in one sentence. Continued trust in God is the bridge between who we are and who we are called to be. It is the invisible thread that sustains our lives in the midst of uncertainty. It is the flame that never goes out, even when the wind blows hard. And although it requires discipline and courage, it is also the source of the greatest peace and security we can experience. Today you may find yourself in a difficult season, one in which it seems God is silent. Perhaps you've waited for an answer for months or even years. Perhaps your faith has weakened and doubt plagues your heart every night. But I want to remind you of something. Your trust doesn't depend on your emotions, but on the character of the one who never fails. And that God who was faithful yesterday remains faithful today and will be faithful tomorrow. So don't give up. Keep trusting. Even if you don't see the dawn yet, remember that the night is not eternal. Even if your hands seem empty, God is working in the invisible. Continual trust is not a single act, but a daily decision. And every day you choose to trust, even if you don't have all the answers, you are bearing witness that your life is sustained by the one who never changes. That constant, firm, and persevering trust is the seed that bears fruit in perfect timing. Don't despair if you haven't seen the harvest yet. Keep trusting, because in His time God will fulfill what He promised. If there is something that deeply bothers human beings, it is waiting in line at the bank, waiting for a medical diagnosis, waiting for an important call, waiting for an answer to a prayer. Waiting confronts us with our anxiety, our need for control, and the illusion that time is in our hands. However, in God's plan, waiting is never a waste of time. It is a sacred space where God works in the invisible, where He forges our character and prepares us for something greater than we imagine. Life is full of periods of waiting that we don't choose. The funny thing is that while we see them as interruptions, God sees them as straining processes. It's like a butterfly's cocoon. From the outside, it appears inactive, a silent, sterile enclosure, but inside, an astonishing transformation is taking place. If someone opens that cocoon before its time, the butterfly will never be able to fly because it needs to struggle in its confinement to strengthen its wings. So too is waiting. It's not a timeout. It's the gym where God strengthens our faith, where He prepares us to soar higher. One of the clearest biblical examples of the purpose of waiting is Joseph, son of Jacob, a dreamer from a young age. He received grandiose visions from God about a future in which he would be a leader and his brothers would bow down to him. But before reaching that destiny, he had to pass through a long desert of trials. He was sold into slavery, slandered, imprisoned, and forgotten. To human eyes, everything seemed unfair and senseless. Where was God? Where were the promises? Yet in the end, when Joseph became governor of Egypt and saved entire nations from famine, he was able to look back and say, "You intended evil against me, but God intended it for good." Genesis 50:20. Joseph's waiting was not a punishment, but the crucible that transformed him into the man who could bear such great responsibility. The purpose of waiting, then, is not to make us suffer, but prepare ourselves. Sometimes we ask for blessings that, in our current state, we couldn't handle. It's like giving a 10-year-old the keys to a car. The car is good, the destination is exciting, but the child isn't ready to drive. God, in His love, makes us wait not because He wants to deny us the blessing, but because He wants to make sure that, when it comes, we can receive it with maturity and responsibility. We also experience this reality in our daily lives. Perhaps you waited months to land that job that seemed unattainable, and in the process you learned discipline, humility, and perseverance that allow you to excel in your position today. Or perhaps you've waited years for a healthy relationship, and in that time you learned to heal wounds, to know yourself, and to depend first on God. Every day of waiting was an investment in your character. Waiting also teaches us dependence. If everything came the instant we asked for it, we would lose the need to seek God. Waiting forces us to approach Him again and again, to strengthen the discipline of prayer, to learn to hear His voice in the midst of silence. Thus, waiting not only forms our character, but also deepens our relationship with the Creator. Another powerful teaching is that waiting reveals our motivations. Do we seek God only for what He can give us, or for who He is? The people of Israel spent 40 years in the desert waiting to enter the promised land. During that time, God wasn't just leading them to a place, but forming a people who would learn to depend on Him, to recognize Him as their only source of provision. Each day they had manna, but they couldn't hoard it. They needed to trust that God would provide again the next day. Thus, waiting trained them to live by God's hand and not by their own strength. The purpose of waiting is also for us to learn to release control. The more we struggle to force results, the more frustration we experience. But when we surrender waiting to God, we find peace. It's like the sower who plants a seed in the ground. He can water it, he can care for it, but he can't rush the germination process. He knows that beneath the earth, something is happening that he doesn't see. So we must trust God in our waiting. Even if we don't see anything, He is working deep within. Even Jesus experienced the purpose of waiting. He spent 30 years in anonymity before beginning His public ministry, 30 years of preparation for 3 years of impact. Couldn't He have started earlier? Of course He could, but there was a perfect time. Every moment of silence and waiting in His earthly life was part of God's plan. The wait, therefore, is an invisible school, where we learn lessons that couldn't be taught any other way: patience, perseverance, dependence, humility, trust. These are virtues that aren't developed in comfort, but in the process. Now, how can we make the most of that purpose of waiting? Here are some practical steps. 1. Set small goals in the midst of waiting. Don't paralyze yourself waiting for the big things. Use the time to grow in the small things. Learn a skill, deepen a healthy habit, invest in your spiritual development. 2. Pray not only by asking but by listening. Use waiting as an opportunity to tune your ear to God's voice. Ask, Lord, what do you want to teach me during this time? 3. Recognize the beauty of the process. Just as gold is purified in fire, your faith is strengthened by waiting. Change the question why to what for. 4. Cultivate daily gratitude. Even if the answer hasn't arrived yet, be thankful for what you have today. Gratitude opens your eyes to blessings you might otherwise overlook. 5. Stay active. Waiting isn't passivity. Take steps of faith, even small ones. One daily step can bring you closer to God's purpose. In conclusion, waiting is not an enemy to be avoided, but a teacher to be embraced. It is not wasted time. It is time invested in the most important work, the transformation of our being. And even though our hearts cry out for quick answers, we can rest in the certainty that God is never late. He arrives right on time, at the perfect moment, when our hearts are ready to receive what He has prepared. Remember, waiting is not an obstacle. It is the bridge to the promise. Waiting can be fertile ground for growth, but also a minefield of doubt. There are days when our faith shines like a lamp in the darkness, and others when that flame seems to dwindle to a fragile spark threatening to go out. In those moments, a fundamental question arises: how do you keep faith and hope alive when the days drag on and answers seem far away? Faith and hope are like two wings of the same bird. Faith connects us with trust in God's character, and hope propels us forward with the certainty that the best is yet to come. If one of those wings fails, flight becomes clumsy. But when both are strengthened, we can weather even the most intense storms. Imagine being on a boat in the middle of a stormy sea. The waves are pounding, the wind is blowing hard, and visibility is almost zero. In that chaos, the anchor becomes your salvation. Even though you can't see the bottom, you know that piece of iron is firmly attached to something solid. That's how faith works. We don't always see what God is doing, but we know He's there, holding us. The Apostle Paul wrote in Hebrews 11:1 that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith doesn't need visible evidence. It is fueled by trust in the unchanging character of God. It is an act of decision, not emotion. If faith is the anchor, hope is the beacon. It's that light on the horizon that reminds us that the storm won't last forever. Jeremiah 29:11 puts it clearly, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a future and a hope." Hope keeps us moving, gives us direction, and reminds us that the God of yesterday and today is also the God of tomorrow. Hope is not naivete or superficial optimism. It's not about closing our eyes to reality, but opening them to the future God is preparing. It's about looking beyond the current circumstances and anticipating the fulfillment of His promises. The Bible is full of stories of people who kept their faith and hope alive in the midst of adverse circumstances. Abraham and Sarah, they waited years for the promised son. In their old age, when everything seemed impossible, faith sustained them. Abraham was called the father of faith because he believed against all hope. Well, who wept for not being able to have children, never stopped crying out to the Lord. Her perseverance in prayer was rewarded with Samuel, a prophet who would mark the history of Israel. Elias on Mount Carmel, after praying fervently, he didn't see rain immediately. He sent his servant to look at the horizon 7 times, until finally a small cloud appeared. Elijah's faith was not quenched, even though at first the sky seemed empty. The disciples at Pentecost, they waited in prayer until they received the promise of the Holy Spirit. Hope held them together, and faith sustained them in obedience until the promise was fulfilled. These stories aren't distant anecdotes. They're reminders that even as time passes, God remains faithful. God doesn't leave us without tools to face the wait. There are concrete practices we can cultivate to keep the flame burning. 1. Constant prayer. Prayer doesn't always change circumstances immediately, but it always changes our hearts. When we pray, we remember that we are not alone, that there is a God who listens and responds in His perfect timing. Sometimes the answer is immediate. Other times, prayer becomes our daily sustenance to keep us from losing heart. 2. Reading the Scriptures. The Bible is an inexhaustible reservoir of hope. In it, we find promises that renew us and remind us that God never fails. Reading passages like Psalm 27, Isaiah 40:31, or Romans 8 gives us new strength. Each word becomes nourishment for the soul. 3. The community of faith. Loneliness is fertile ground for doubt. That's why we need to walk with others. A word of encouragement, a shared prayer, a testimony heard at the right moment can rekindle our hope. Shared faith multiplies. 4. A gratitude journal. Writing down at least 3 things to be thankful for each day opens our eyes to God's silent work. Gratitude is like a lens that changes our perspective. Where we once saw emptiness, we begin to see fullness. 5. Remember past victories. Just as David remembered how God delivered him from the lion and the bear before facing Goliath, we too must remember how God has sustained us before. That memory is fuel for hope. I remember the story of a woman who faced the diagnosis of a serious illness. The doctors didn't offer much hope, and waiting for results became an emotional wilderness. But instead of giving up, she decided to cling to her faith. Every day she read God's promises aloud, kept a notebook in which she wrote gratitude, and surrounded her life with people who prayed with her. After months, the results began to improve. But the most striking thing wasn't her physical recovery, but how her faith inspired others. The hope she maintained in the midst of darkness was a beacon of light for those around her. This testimony reminds us that faith and hope not only sustain us, but also become a light for others. We cannot ignore the fact that there will be moments of doubt. The Bible itself shows us people who doubted. Thomas needed to see Jesus' wounds, Gideon asked for signs, Moses questioned his calling. Doubt does not disqualify faith, it simply tests it. The important thing is not to never doubt, but to decide to continue trusting even in the midst of doubt. Every time you choose to take a step of faith despite your questions, your confidence grows stronger. Faith and hope are like a flame in an oil lamp. If we stop feeding it, it eventually goes out. But if we add oil each day, through prayer, the word, gratitude, and community, that flame will stay lit even in the darkest night. Life will present us with many seasons, some of abundance, others of scarcity, some of clarity, others of uncertainty. But in all of them, faith and hope are our inseparable companions. With them, we can navigate the weight not with resignation, but with active trust in the God who never abandons us. So even if your path seems long and the answers are delayed, keep feeding that flame. Remember that each day of sustained faith and hope brings you closer to the fulfillment of the promises. And when the time comes for the answer, you will be able to look back and say, it was worth trusting. Often, God's blessings come silently, unexpectedly, or even disguised in situations that initially seem adverse. Therefore, recognizing and accepting blessings requires attention, openness, and gratitude. Not everything good comes in the format we expect. Sometimes God gives us something we didn't ask for, but it's exactly what we need. Everyday life is full of examples of blessings that initially go unnoticed. A person may fervently desire a promotion at work, and while they wait, God opens the door to an opportunity beyond their imagination. Another may ask for healing for a financial situation, and the answer comes through relationships, advice, or lessons that transform their perspective and allow them to thrive in deeper ways. Recognizing blessings involves learning to see the hand of God in the ordinary, in every detail that sustains our life. Joseph, who endured betrayal and imprisonment, finally saw God use him to save entire nations. The blessing that seemed belated was in reality the perfect culmination of God's purpose. Rachel, mother of Joseph and Benjamin, waited years for a son. Her prayer was answered, and although it came in difficult circumstances, her blessing was a seed of transformation for the entire history of Israel. The people of Israel. He received manna in the desert. It wasn't gold or riches, but it represented God's daily provision, teaching them to depend on Him day after day. These stories teach us that a blessing is not always what we expected, but it is what we need. The difficulty lies in accepting that the unexpected can also be good, and sometimes better than our own expectations. One of the biggest obstacles to recognizing blessings is our tendency to focus only on what's missing. We complain about what we don't have, and in the process, overlook the gifts already in our lives. This is what the Bible calls spiritual blindness. In Matthew 25:29, Jesus says, "To him who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away." This doesn't mean that God punishes us, but rather that gratitude and recognition open the door to further blessings. 1. Observing the ordinary as extraordinary blessings don't always come in large doses. Sometimes they come in small amounts, like an unexpected smile, timely advice, a daily gift of provision, or a moment of peace amidst the chaos. Learning to see the everyday as a blessing transforms our perspective on life. 2. Reflect and compare with what God has already done. Remembering how God has provided in the past allows us to identify present blessings. Every trial overcome, every answer to prayer, every daily miracle is evidence of His faithfulness. 3. Practice active gratitude. It's not enough to feel gratitude, we must express it. This can be in prayer, words of praise, acts of generosity, or sharing our testimony with others. Active gratitude opens the heart and allows us to receive more blessings. 4. Accept blessings with humility. Recognizing that all good things come from God and not just from our own efforts protects us from pride. Romans 8:28 reminds us, we know that God works in all things for the good of those who love Him. Even challenges can contain hidden blessings. God often blesses us in the midst of adversity. A job layoff can be the gateway to a better job, an illness can spark life-changing habit changes, or a disappointment can teach us to trust Him more deeply. These blessings in disguise require discernment, see beyond the immediate pain, and perceive divine intention. For example, a young person who loses a dream scholarship might think all is lost, but that same path leads them to a different project, where they discover talents they hadn't known about and form friendships and experiences that shape their future in a more solid way. The blessing was there, just in a different format than expected. I remember the story of a family who searched for a home for months. Each property seemed ideal at first, but problems always arose. Prices that were too high, locations inconvenient, legal issues. After many frustrations, they finally found a home that exceeded all expectations. Larger, better located, and with a neighborhood that fostered community and friendship. What initially seemed like a waste of time turned into a perfect gift. God had saved the best blessing until just the right moment. 1. Prayer of recognition. Express gratitude explicitly for every blessing received. This strengthens our spiritual perception and connects us with God. 2. Daily reflection. Take a few minutes to think about the gifts of the day, big or small. 3. Share testimonies. Talking about blessings with others strengthens our own faith and that of those who listen to us. 4. Constant humility, remembering that everything comes from God, not just our efforts. This protects us from arrogance and opens our lives to greater grace. 5. Active patience. Wait for blessings without forcing them, trusting in God's perfect timing. Accepting God's blessings isn't simply about receiving what we like or what suits us. It's about learning to recognize His hand in every circumstance, trusting His timing, and being grateful even for the unexpected. True blessing isn't always immediate or visible, but it's always perfect and sufficient. When we learn to identify and accept it, our hearts are filled with peace, gratitude, and love, and our relationship with God is strengthened. Every blessing is a reminder that we are not alone, that God works in the hidden, and that His plan is always for our good. By accepting and acknowledging His gifts, even the smallest or those disguised as difficulties, we open the door to a more fulfilling, conscious and grateful life, where every day is an opportunity to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. Trusting God is not limited to moments of crisis or seasons of waiting. It is a lifestyle, a daily practice that transforms our journey and our perception of the world. A life of continued trust is not the absence of problems, but the certainty that God is with us every step of the way, in the visible and the invisible, in the easy and the difficult. Continuous confidence is built on consistency. It's not enough to believe one day and doubt the next. It's about decide each morning to give our day to God, our emotions, our plans, and our fears. Every day is an opportunity to renew our faith and affirm that, even if we don't understand everything, our lives are in the hands of the God who never fails. Think of your faith as a muscle. If you don't exercise it daily, it loses strength. Continued trust works the same way. Every prayer, every Bible reading, every act of obedience is a step that strengthens our faith. As Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight." This verse does not promise that the road will always be smooth or easy, but it does guarantee divine guidance and company. Living trusting in God also means not relying exclusively on our own strength. Life presents us with uncertainties, financial challenges, health issues, family conflicts, or difficult career decisions. If we try to control everything on our own, anxiety consumes us. Trusting in God allows us to let go of control, resting in His wisdom and provision. It's like handing the helm of our lives over to an experienced captain who knows the storm better than we do. Daniel in Babylon, maintaining his faith amid exile and cultural pressure, even in the face of a decree prohibiting prayer to God, demonstrated unwavering confidence. His perseverance earned him protection and honor from God. Job, although he lost his family, health, and possessions, he did not curse God. Job honestly expressed his grief, but his trust persisted, and eventually God restored everything in spades. Nehemiah. He led the rebuilding of the wall of Jerusalem in the face of constant opposition. His confidence did not waver, and his perseverance enabled him to complete the work God had entrusted to him. These examples show that continued trust does not eliminate the challenges, but it gives us strength, clarity, and direction to face them. 1. Prayer as a daily habit. Not just asking, but also listening. Prayer connects us with God and reminds us that we are not alone. Even 5 minutes a day can renew our spirit. 2. Meditation on the Word. Reading the Bible isn't just about accumulating knowledge, it's about strengthening your faith. Every verse you memorize and meditate on becomes a reminder of God's faithfulness in your life. 3. Reflection and gratitude. Taking time to acknowledge daily blessings and lessons builds confidence. Even in times of trouble, there are reasons to be thankful. Health, provision, protection, opportunities. 4. Declare biblical promises. Speaking out loud what God promises strengthens the mind and spirit. For example, declaring, "God guides and provides for me at all times," or "I trust Him in the midst of uncertainty," is an act of practical faith. 5th, service and generosity. Trusting in God frees us from selfishness. When we give time, resources, or support to others, we confirm that we believe in His provision and not in our own reserves. The river and the current. Living with trust is like floating down a river. We don't control the current, but we learn to navigate it, stay afloat, and enjoy the journey, trusting that the river will take us where we need to go. The tree in the storm, its deep roots sustain it when the wind blows hard. Our faith, nourished by prayer and the Word, keeps us strong even when circumstances strike. I remember a friend who went through an intense financial crisis. Everything seemed lost: accumulated debt, failed job opportunities, total uncertainty. But he decided to live each day trusting in God, praying, seeking wisdom, and relying on his community. Over time, they not only emerged from the crisis, but also found stability and new opportunities they hadn't previously imagined. This continued trust transformed not only the situation, but also his character. He learned patience, perseverance, and dependence on God. Continued trust isn't easy. There will be days of doubt, nights of anxiety, and moments of discouragement. But these challenges are opportunities to strengthen faith. When doubts arise, let us remember past victories and biblical promises. When we feel fear, let us use prayer and praise to reaffirm our security in God. When the road seems long, let us take steps of obedience, even small ones. Each step confirms our faith. Living with continual trust in God is a daily decision, a commitment of heart and mind. It doesn't mean that problems disappear, but rather that we walk with the certainty that God is with us, that His provision never fails and His plan is perfect. It's a lifestyle that transforms anxiety into peace, uncertainty into clarity, and doubt into active hope. When our lives become a reflection of daily trust, we not only receive direction and blessings, but we become light for others, demonstrating that true security lies not in our abilities but in God. Every day we choose to trust. Even in uncertain circumstances, we are building a living testimony, a heart that rests, a spirit that perseveres, and a life that honors its Creator. Throughout this journey, we have explored a spiritual path that begins with patience, passes through waiting, faith, and hope, and culminates in the acceptance of blessings and continued trust in God. Each stage has taught us that life is not just a succession of events, but an opportunity for growth, transformation, and connection with the divine. Now, the closing of this script is not a full stop, but a starting point, a call to live each day with purpose, faith, and gratitude. Life presents us with moments of uncertainty, challenges that seem insurmountable, and waits that seem endless. But as we've learned, every wait has a purpose. Every challenge is a school where God teaches us lessons of character, perseverance, and dependence on Him. Remember young Joseph, sold into slavery, unjustly imprisoned, but who eventually became a leader and savior of nations. Remember Hannah, who mourned for years for a son and received Samuel as the answer to her persistent faith. Remember Daniel, who maintained his integrity and trust in the midst of exile, and Job, who saw his life restored after the toughest trial. Every Bible story reminds us that God never forgets his children and that his timing is perfect, although sometimes incomprehensible to us. Living a life of active faith is not limited to contemplation. It is not enough to know these truths. We must apply them every day. Patience, faith, hope, gratitude, and trust must become habits, conscious decisions that guide our words, our emotions, and our actions. 1. Decide to practice patience. Don't let anxiety or frustration rule your days. Whenever you wait, remember that God is working even when you don't see immediate results. 2. Find the purpose in every wait. Ask, Lord, what do you want to teach me today? Every difficulty is an opportunity for growth. 3. Strengthen your faith and hope. Pray, read the word, share your testimony, record your gratitude. Every daily action strengthens the certainty that God is faithful. 4. Recognize and accept the blessings. Look at the gifts already in your life, even the small or unexpected ones. Learn to be grateful and receive with humility. 5. Live continually trusting in God. Don't rely on your own strength. His guidance, provision, and love are constant, even when life seems uncertain. The garden of life. Every seed you plant takes time to grow. Don't pull it out before it's time. Water it, nurture it, and trust that the fruit will come. The lamp that does not go out, keep the flame of faith and hope burning daily. Prayer, the word, and gratitude are the oil that allows the light to shine in the darkness. The river that guides you, even if you can't see the end of the road, trust in the current that God directs. He knows every curve and every eddy, and he will take you where you need to be. Living with confidence in God does not eliminate challenges, but changes our perspective on them. Every obstacle becomes a learning opportunity, every disappointment a door to something better, every expectation a space of spiritual transformation. When we understand that our life is in the hands of a God who loves us and guides us, we can walk with peace, courage, and purpose. Furthermore, the active life of faith not only transforms us, but we inspire others. Every act of trust, every word of gratitude, every shared testimony is a seed planted in the hearts of those around us. Thus, our lives become beacons shining hope for others, showing that even in the midst of uncertainty, it is possible to live with joy and confidence. Today, faced with every challenge, every expectation, every uncertainty, you can make a decision. Live with fear and anxiety, or live with faith, hope, and active trust in God. You can choose to value what you already have, be grateful for what comes, and wait patiently for what is to come. Every day is a new opportunity to practice these virtues, to strengthen your character, to walk in obedience, and to experience God's faithfulness. Remember, life is not just what happens around you, but how you choose to respond to what God allows in your path. By applying these teachings, your heart will find peace amidst the storm. Your steps will find direction even in uncertainty, and your spirit will be filled with gratitude, hope, and joy. But in the midst of that wait, I decided to take out a book I had in my backpack and started reading. What seemed like a wasted time transformed into a moment of learning and peace. In the end, that wait became a space where I discovered something valuable that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise. That day I realized that patience doesn't change circumstances, but it does change our attitude toward them. When we cultivate patience in small things, we are also training ourselves to face big things. If we learn to wait calmly in line, we will also be able to wait with faith for a healing process, a job opportunity, or a promise from God that we have yet to see fulfilled. Daily patience builds character, helps us appreciate the process, and reminds us that every day, even those that seem monotonous or difficult, has a purpose in God's plan. Patience in everyday life is not a burden, but a spiritual training. Every small act of waiting with faith is a seed that strengthens our character and brings us closer to God's purpose for us. When we think about waiting, we almost always associate it with frustration, with the feeling of being stuck in life, while everything around us seems to be moving forward. However, what is rarely mentioned is that in that same space of apparent inactivity lie some of the greatest gifts God gives us. It's like a secret room where, at first glance, there is only silence and solitude, but when we turn on the light, we discover it's full of treasures. The problem is that we almost never stop long enough to explore what's there. Waiting, when lived with faith and purpose, becomes a workshop where our character is forged. It is there that we learn to know ourselves, to detect our strengths as well as our weaknesses. Often, what we ask of God does not come immediately, not because He does not want to give it to us, but because He knows that if we receive it prematurely, we will not be ready to sustain it. What good would it do to receive a blessing if we do not know how to manage it? Therefore, each day of waiting becomes a silent training that prepares us to firmly sustain what is to come. Consider, for example, Joseph, the son of Jacob. His brothers sold him, he was a slave in Egypt, and he spent years unjustly imprisoned. At first glance, it all seemed like a cruel and unjustified delay, but in reality, that time of darkness was forging in Joseph a firm character, a profound wisdom, and a leadership capacity that would later make him governor of Egypt. If Joseph had arrived at the palace earlier, without having gone through the pit and prison, he probably would not have had the maturity necessary to handle power without it destroying him. His waiting, although painful, was the fertile soil from which his blessing sprang. The blessings of waiting aren't always immediately visible, but they manifest in the way we learn to value what we receive. When everything comes easily and quickly, we tend to take it for granted. But when what we long for takes a long time to arrive, our hearts learn to appreciate it differently. Waiting teaches us gratitude. It teaches us to recognize that every detail is a gift and that nothing has been given to us by our own merit, but by grace. That gratitude is, in itself, a blessing because it changes our perspective on life. Another of the hidden blessings of waiting is spiritual sensitivity. In the silence and apparent delay, we learn to hear God's voice in ways we would never hear in haste. It's like when someone turns off all the noise in a room. At first it seems uncomfortable, even desperate, but after a while our ears begin to pick up sounds that were always there, but were drowned out by the noise. Waiting is that silence necessary to perceive the eternal. There is also the blessing of fortitude. Waiting is not a passive act. It is endurance. It is training of the soul. Every day you decide to trust, even if you don't see anything, you're strengthening your spirit. It's like the athlete who repeats the same exercise over and over again without seeing immediate results, but who, unknowingly, is building the strength that will one day be needed at the most crucial moment. Waiting forges an inner resilience that no external circumstance can break. And finally, there is the blessing of transformation, because no one who goes through a true season of waiting comes out the same person. Something changes deep within. Vision broadens, desires are purified, faith is strengthened, and the relationship with God deepens. Waiting not only prepares the way for blessing, but it prepares us to receive it. And when that happens, we realize that what we asked for at the beginning is no longer what we long for at the end. Sometimes we even discover that God gives us something better than we ever imagined. Make today the day you decide to trust without reservation. Make your life a reflection of patience, faith, hope, and gratitude. Recognize the blessings, even the small ones. Live each day as an opportunity to strengthen your relationship with God and impact those around you. Let every action, every thought, and every word be an expression of continued trust in the God who never fails, which transforms waiting into purpose, difficulty into teaching, and life into a testimony of His infinite love.